Cora Denning was 58 years old the morning a man in a pressed gray suit knocked on a door that was already paid for and told her it wasn't hers anymore. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. He tacked a hand-lettered notice to her own screen door over a debt of $200, and he watched her read it. She didn't cry. She read it twice. Then she folded her hands over her apron and looked at him the way you look at weather coming. The man was Emmett Voss. A week later, he stood out on Main Street in front of the feed store, loud enough for the 11 people inside to hear him plain. "A deal's a deal, Cora," he said. "Your Walter signed it with his own hand. I did him a kindness no bank in Pruitt County would." And every one of those 11 people looked at their boots, because they owed Emmett Voss something too, or they were afraid they might someday. So the widow took her husband's little green receipt book to a 27-year-old lawyer nobody trusted yet, and asked him one question about the number Voss had written himself. If you believe quiet people read the fine print, this story is for you. Before we go on, if stories like this one find you, do me a small thing. Subscribe so the next one reaches you. And leave a comment telling me the town you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this one travels. Now, let me start it right, from the beginning, and tell it the way it happened. Cora Denning grew up on the flatland north of Halloway, where the corn ran to the edge of the sky and the freight trains marked the hours better than any clock. She was a plain girl, and she stayed a plain woman, and she never once minded it. She married Walter Denning in the fall of 1948 in a church that smelled of candle smoke and cold plaster, and they moved into a narrow white house on Sedgwick Street with a mortgage that felt, that first winter, like a stone tied to both their ankles. They paid it off in the spring of 1970. 22 years. Walter came home from the foundry that day and set the last receipt on the kitchen table like it might break, and neither of them said a word for a while. Then Cora made coffee, and Walter went out to the shed, and when he came back in, he had the deed in his hand. Free and clear, their name on it, and nobody else's. He put it in a tin box that had once held tea, and he set the box on the shelf above the stove, where the heat kept it dry. "There," he said. "Now it's ours to keep." That was the whole speech. Walter never was a talker. You have to understand what that house was to them. It wasn't a fine house. The porch sagged on the east corner, and the paint came off in your hand if you leaned on the rail. But every board of it had been bought with something. The kitchen floor was paid for with the winter Walter worked doubles at the pour and came home too tired to eat. The new roof, in 1963, was paid for with the summer Cora took in mending for half the women on Sedgwick and 2 streets over. Hemming and patching by lamplight until her eyes ached. They didn't have children. It didn't happen for them, and after a while they stopped waiting on it, and the house became the thing they poured themselves into instead. It was the record of their whole married life, written in shingles and floorboards and the little green tomatoes Cora put up every August. Walter Denning worked 30 years at the Halloway foundry. He was a molder. He shaped the sand and set the cores and watched the iron come out orange and screaming. And he did it honest, the way he did everything. Men at the foundry told a story about Walter that Cora only heard after he died. He'd found a $5 bill on the shop floor once. And instead of pocketing it, he'd stood by the time clock at shift change and asked every man who passed if he'd dropped it, until he found the one who had. $5. Walter wrote down every dollar he ever handled, even the ones nobody asked him to write down. It was just how he was made. He couldn't rest with a number unaccounted for. That's why the winter of 1966 marks this story the way it does. It was February, and cold enough to crack the ground. Walter was working the pour floor when a chain hoist let go above him, and a mold came down wrong, and he went down under it and cracked his hip on the iron grating. He didn't break it clean through, the doctor said later, but he cracked it, and a cracked hip on a 53-year-old foundry man is not a thing you walk off. He was 6 weeks in the house, 6 weeks flat on his back and then hobbling on a cane, and the whole time no wage coming in, because the foundry paid you for the hours you gave it and not a minute more. They had a little saved. It went. It went on the light bill and the coal and the ordinary running of a house, and then the county doctor's bill came. $40 for the setting and the follow-up and the medicine, and there wasn't $40 in the tin box or anywhere else. Walter tried the bank first. He put on his good coat, and he took his cane, and he walked down to the Pruitt County Savings, and he asked the loan officer for $200 to see them through until he could stand at the pour again. And the loan officer, a soft young man with clean fingernails, looked at Walter's cane and his gray face, and told him no. A bank does not lend money to a man who cannot work. That is the whole arithmetic of a bank. They lend you an umbrella and ask for it, back when it rains. So Walter went to Emmett Voss. Everybody in Halloway knew about Voss. He ran the appliance store on Main, refrigerators, washers, the new color televisions in the window. But the store was the smaller half of what he did. The bigger half he did in the back room, at a desk with a green-shaded lamp, with a strongbox and a ledger, and a fountain pen he kept full of black ink. He lent money to the people the bank turned away. Laid-up men. Widows, farmers, waiting on a harvest. He called himself a friend to working families, and he said it so often and so warmly that some of them believed it, right up until the day they couldn't pay. Voss lent Walter the $200. He was gracious about it. He came around the desk and shook Walter's hand and said he was glad to help a good man in a hard spot, and he had Walter sign a note. Walter signed it. He was in pain and he was ashamed, and his wife needed the doctor paid, and he signed the paper Voss put in front of him without reading every line of it, the way a drowning man will grab whatever's held out. Then he took the money home and paid the doctor, and he started to mend. And he started to pay Voss back. $6 every payday. That was the arrangement. Walter went down to the store every other Friday with $6 folded in his shirt pocket, and he handed it across the counter, and Voss marked it in his big ledger with the fountain pen. And here is the thing that mattered. The thing nobody knew was mattering at the time. Walter kept his own record, too. He bought a little green receipt book at the 5 and dime. The kind that fits in a shirt pocket, with a carbon leaf so you keep a copy of what you write. And every single time he paid Voss $6, Walter wrote it down. The date, the amount, the note it was against. He wrote down every dollar, even the ones nobody made him record, because he could not do it any other way. Cora used to tease him about it a little. All that writing for $6. Walter would just lick the pencil and write it down. A number ought to have a home, he'd say. Then he'd put the little green book back in the tackle tray of his toolbox, where he kept it, and that was that. Now do the arithmetic that Walter never quite did out loud. $6 a payday. 2 paydays a month. $12 a month, month after month. For 5 years, Walter paid, and paid, and paid. He paid through the rest of 1966 and all of 1967. He paid through 1968, the year the foundry cut back and everyone was scared. He paid through 1969 and into 1970, the same spring they finished off the house. He paid through the winter of 1970 and into 1971. 5 years of $6 Fridays, and by the spring of 1971, Walter Denning had handed Emmett Voss more than $400 on a loan of $200. $400 on a $200 loan. And the balance, according to Voss, had not gone down. It had gone up. Walter never got to argue about it. because in April of 1971, his heart quit. He was in the garden, turning the ground for the peas, and he set the spade down and sat on the porch step to catch his breath, and he never got up. Cora found him there in the evening light, with his hand on his chest and his hat fallen in the grass. 58 years old. The doctor said it was quick, and Cora held on to that the way you hold on to anything in that first black stretch. It was quick. He didn't lie there afraid. He just went, the way he'd have wanted to, with dirt on his hands and the peas half planted. The foundry men came to the funeral in their Sunday coats. The church women brought hams and cakes until Cora's icebox couldn't hold them. And Emmett Voss came too, in a dark suit, and he took Cora's hand in both of his at the back of the church and told her Walter was a fine man and a good customer, and she should call on him if she ever needed anything at all. Cora thanked him. She didn't know yet what he meant by it. She thought it was kindness. It was the appraiser walking through the house before the sale. 3 weeks after they put Walter in the ground, the letter came. It came typed, on the cream-colored paper Voss used for business, folded in thirds in an envelope with the appliance store's name in the corner. Cora opened it at the kitchen table with a butter knife, because Walter had always opened the mail with a butter knife, and her hands did it out of habit. And she read it, and then she sat very still. The note, the letter said, was in default. Because the borrower, her Walter, was deceased and the payments had stopped, the entire balance had come due at once. And the balance, the letter said, was $1,240. Cora read that number 3 times. $1,240. On 200 borrowed. She thought there must be a mistake, a slip of the typewriter, an extra digit. But the letter was patient and specific. There was the original principal. There was the interest. There were carrying charges and charges upon default, each with its own line and its own figure, marching down the page toward a total that had nothing to do with any money Cora had ever seen. $400 paid, and somehow $1,200 more owed. And then the last line of the letter, the one that made the room go cold around her. The note, it said, was secured by real property, specifically by the borrower's residence at Sedgwick Street. The house. Walter had pledged the house. Cora set the letter down on the oilcloth and put both hands flat on the table to stop them shaking. Walter had pledged the house. When? He couldn't have. He wouldn't have. The house was the one thing, the sacred thing, the thing they'd bled 22 years to own free and clear. Walter would sooner have cut off his hand than sign it away over $200. There had to be some mistake, but the letter didn't read like a mistake. It read like a thing that had been true for 5 years and was only now being said out loud. She didn't sleep that night. She sat up in the kitchen with the deed out of the tin box, holding it, reading their 2 names on it, and trying to understand how a piece of paper could say the house was theirs, and another piece of paper could say it wasn't. She was too proud to call anyone. She kept thinking she would sort it out herself in the morning, that there was an ordinary explanation, that a person just had to go and ask the right question and it would all come clear. That was Cora's blind spot, and it nearly cost her everything. She believed the law was a thing built for other people, for men in good suits with clean fingernails, and that people like her simply took what came and were grateful when it wasn't worse. So she didn't call a lawyer. She decided to go and speak to Emmett Voss herself, plain and reasonable, the way Walter would have. She went down to the store on a Tuesday, in her good dress, with the letter in her handbag. The appliance store was bright and humming. The new televisions flickered in the window, all showing the same game show, and a washing machine turned an empty load in the corner to show the customers how quiet it ran. Voss was at the counter, talking to a woman about a chest freezer, and when he saw Cora come in, he finished with the woman first, slow and unhurried, before he turned to the widow. That was on purpose. Cora understood later that everything Voss did was on purpose. "Cora," he said, "warm as anything. How are you holding up?" She took the letter out of her handbag and set it on the counter between them. There were 2 other customers in the store, a farmer looking at a radio and a young mother with a boy by the hand, and they were near enough to hear. Cora would remember that later, that there were witnesses, though she didn't think of them that way then. "There's a mistake in this, Mr. Voss," she said, keeping her voice level. "It says Walter owed $1,200. Walter borrowed $200, and he paid you $6 every payday for 5 years. I'd like to understand the mistake." Voss looked at the letter as if he'd never seen it before, though of course he'd dictated it. He shook his head slowly, sorrowful, a friend to working families breaking bad news. "There's no mistake, Cora. I wish there were. Your Walter signed a note, and a note has terms, and the terms are the terms. Interest accrues. When the payments stopped, well, he spread his hands. The whole thing came due. That's not me being hard. That's just how a note works. I'm sorry nobody explained it to you." $400, Cora said. "He paid you over $400. And the balance is what the balance is." Voss leaned on the counter and lowered his voice, but not so low the farmer couldn't hear him. This was the part he wanted heard. "Cora, listen to me. I did your husband a kindness no bank in this county would have done. He came to me laid up, no wages, no collateral the bank would touch, and I gave him money the same day. On his word and his signature. I didn't have to do that. I did it because I'm a friend to working families in this town, and Walter was a good man. He let that sit. Now, I don't want to see you turned out of your home. I'm not that kind of man. Here's what I'll do. You sign a new note with me, clean it all up, put it on fresh terms, and I'll let you stay in the house a good while yet. Long as you keep up. Nobody has to know your business." It was said so gently. Rob the woman of her house and call it letting her stay in it. Cora felt the shape of it then, the real shape. The way you feel a splinter before you can see it. She did not sign anything. She did the only thing she could think to do, which was to ask a plain question in a plain voice. "I'd like a copy of the original note, Mr. Voss, the one Walter signed, so I can read the terms for myself." For just a second, 1 second, the warmth flickered on Voss's face. Then it came right back. "Of course," he said. "Of course. I'll have it copied for you. These things take a little time, it's in the files." He smiled. "You come back in a week or so." And he turned back to the woman with the chest freezer, and that was Cora dismissed. He never gave her the note. Not that week, not the next. Every time she asked, it was in the files, it was with the accountant, it was being copied. Cora was slow, but she was not a fool, and after the third excuse she understood that Voss did not want her to read the note. And a thing a man does not want you to read is exactly the thing you must find a way to read. So Cora did something that was not like her. She sent Emmett Voss a certified letter. She wrote it out 3 times before she was satisfied, sitting at the kitchen table with Walter's dictionary open beside her to be sure of the words. In it she demanded, formally, a full and itemized accounting of the note, every charge, every payment, the rate of interest, all of it in writing. And she added 1 sentence more, a sentence she almost struck out for fear of how bold it was, and then left in because it was true. She wrote that she had reason to believe the interest charged on the note exceeded what the law of the state of Indiana allowed, and that she intended to find out. She didn't fully know what she meant by it. She'd heard, somewhere, years back, that there was a limit on what a man could charge, that the law drew a line somewhere and a lender couldn't go past it. She didn't know where the line was or what it was called. But 400 paid on 200, and 1,200 still owed, had the smell of a line crossed. So she wrote the sentence down, and she signed her name. She took it to the post office and up to the window, where Mr. Halbrook the postmaster stamped it, and had her sign the green certified card, and he was witness to the day and the hour it was mailed. though neither of them thought of it as witnessing at the time. It was just Cora mailing a letter. Later it would matter that a fair and honest man had seen her mail it and seen the date, and could say so. Voss's answer to that letter was not to answer it at all. His answer was to move faster. Because 8 days later, on a bright cold Saturday in the first week of October, Cora came out onto her porch with a basket of wet washing to hang, and there was a paper nailed to her screen door. It was hand-lettered, in black, in Voss's own careful capitals. Sheriff's Sale, it said across the top. And beneath that, in words that Cora read standing there with the wet washing dripping on her shoes, it laid out that the property at Sedgwick Street, the Denning place, would be sold at public auction on the courthouse steps on the third Saturday in October, to satisfy a debt. Her house, on the block. In 2 weeks. She stood there a long time. A car went by on the street and slowed, and she felt the eyes of it. Then she took the notice down off her screen door, carefully, because her hands wanted to tear it and she wouldn't let them. And she folded it and put it in her apron pocket, and she hung out the washing anyway, every piece, because the washing had to dry whether the house was sold or not. Then she walked into town, because she'd heard there was another one. There was. On the big corkboard outside the county courthouse, where they posted the tax notices and the marriage bans and the auctions, there was a second sheriff's sale notice, printed proper this time, with the Denning name on it, and the date and the address. For anyone in Pruitt County to read. And by that Saturday afternoon, everyone had. The feed store crowd read it. The church women read it. The children read it walking home from town and carried it to their mothers. The whole of Halloway learned in a single day that the widow Denning was going to lose her house over a debt, and the number in the wire was $200. And the buzz of it went through the town like current through a wet field. And that was the moment, standing in front of that corkboard, that Cora got her answer about the house. Because right there on the notice, plain as the date, was the reference to the pledge, the mortgage clause, the security on the note, the house named as collateral. It was real. Walter had signed it, somewhere in that back room, in the winter of 1966. Laid up and ashamed and desperate to get his wife's doctor paid, Walter Denning had signed a paper that put their house against $200, and either he hadn't understood it, or he'd been too proud to tell her. And now he was in the ground and couldn't explain. It was real. The one thing she'd prayed was a mistake was the truest thing in the whole business. The days after that were the hardest, and they were hard in a way Cora hadn't expected. It wasn't the fear that was worst. It was the pity. She went to church that Sunday, because she went to church every Sunday, and she would not let Emmett Voss change that. And she felt the whole congregation's eyes slide off her when she came in. Nobody would look at her straight. The women who'd brought her hams 3 months before now touched her sleeve and murmured and looked away, and it was worse than if they'd spat, because their kindness had gone soft and useless with pity. They'd already decided she'd lost. In their minds, the house was gone, and Cora was a sad thing to be gentle with. She sat through the whole service with her chin up and her eyes forward, and when the last hymn was done, she walked out ahead of all of them, so she wouldn't have to see one more careful, sorrowful face. She went home. And something in the walk home changed her, hardened her, turned the grief in her chest into something with an edge. She was done being pitied. She was done being reasonable and plain, and waiting for someone in a good suit to correct the mistake. There was no mistake. There was only a man taking a house, and a town watching him do it, and a widow expected to go quiet. She went into the shed, and she got Walter's toolbox down off the bench. She didn't know exactly why she wanted it. She wanted something of his in her hands, maybe, some solid thing he'd touched 1,000 times. It was a heavy metal box, red once, mostly rust now, with a tray that lifted out on hinged arms. She set it on the workbench and opened it. And there were Walter's things just as he'd left them, the tack hammer, the good screwdrivers, a coffee can of mixed screws, the tackle tray from the years he'd tried to like fishing and never quite did. And in the tackle tray, tucked in the compartment where a man would keep his hooks, was the little green receipt book. Cora lifted it out. It was soft with handling, the cover gone gray at the corners, the spine cracked white. She opened it, and there in Walter's careful hand, page after page, was every $6 he had ever paid Emmett Voss. The date. The amount. The note number he'd copied off the top of the note. $6, and the date, and the note number, over and over, 5 years of Fridays, each one written down, because a number ought to have a home. She sat down on the shed's cold step with the book in her lap and turned the pages, and she did cry then, finally, but not the way she'd cried at the funeral. She cried because Walter, without knowing it, without ever once suspecting it would matter, had spent 5 years building the exact record that might save the house he'd signed away. He couldn't rest with a number unaccounted for. And now, every one of those numbers had a home, and a date, and a witness in his own honest hand. She counted them. She sat on that step in the failing light, and she counted every entry, and she added them up on the back page with the stub of Walter's carpenter pencil, and the total came to $410. $410 paid on a $200 loan. She looked at that number a long time. Then she closed the book and held it against her chest, and she made up her mind about something. The next morning she put on her good dress again, and she put the green receipt book and Voss's typed letter and the sheriff's sale notice all together in her handbag, and she walked into town to the one door she had not tried. It was a narrow storefront on a side street off the square, with a hand-painted sign in the window that read Legal Aid. And under it, smaller, D. Wren, attorney, everybody in Halloway knew the office, and nobody respected it. It was where the young lawyer had set up, the one nobody had heard of, the one who took cases for people who couldn't pay, which in the general opinion of Pruitt County meant the cases weren't worth taking, and neither was he. Cora had walked past it a dozen times. That morning she stopped, and looked at the sign, and thought that a lawyer nobody trusted, yet had at least not yet let anybody down. And she went in. David Wren was 27 years old and looked younger, and his office was one room with a desk and 2 chairs and shelves of law books he'd bought second-hand, and a coffee pot that had seen hard use. He stood up too fast when she came in and knocked a folder off the desk, and Cora thought, "This is who I've come to, this boy," and nearly turned around. But she was there, and she was tired of turning around. So she sat down in the chair across from him, and she told him the whole of it, plain, from the winter of 1966 to the paper on her screen door. And she laid the letter and the notice and the little green book on his desk one at a time as she went. Wren listened. That was the first good sign, though Cora didn't rank it as one yet. He listened without interrupting, and he read the letter twice, and when she was done he was quiet a moment, and then he said the thing she'd been braced to hear. He said that a signed note was a signed note, and a mortgage pledge was a mortgage pledge, and that these things were hard to fight, and that maybe the best course was to go to Mr. Voss and try to work out a payment plan she could live with, and keep the house that way. And that, Cora would think about this many times afterward, that was very nearly the end of it. A payment plan. If she'd said yes to that, if Wren had picked up the phone right then and called Voss to negotiate, the house would have been lost slow instead of fast, and Voss would have won, and no one would ever have said his name in a courtroom. It was that close. The green book sat on the desk between them, unopened, and the answer sat inside it, and neither of them was looking at it yet. But Cora had come too far to be handed off to Emmett Voss again. "I'm not signing another note with that man," she said. "I've read the letter 40 times, Mr. Wren. Read me the terms off it. Read me what Walter agreed to. I want to hear it out loud." So Wren picked the typed letter back up and read the terms aloud, the way she asked. The principal. The security. And then the rate. And here he slowed down, because the rate was written in the small way, the way lenders write the thing they don't want read, and he had to say it twice to be sure he had it. The interest, the letter said, ran at 2% per month. 2% a month, Cora said. Is that a lot? Wren didn't answer right away. He was young, and he was green, and this was not the kind of law he'd expected to be doing in a one-room office, but he had gone to law school, and something was moving in the back of his mind, some half-remembered thing from a dull afternoon in a classroom 2 years gone. 2% a month. He set the letter down, and he pulled a book off the shelf behind him, a thick one, and he turned pages for a while with Cora watching, and then he stopped on a page and read it again, and Cora saw his face change. "Mrs. Denning," he said slowly, "there's a limit. The state sets a ceiling on what a lender can charge in interest. It's in the statute right here." He tapped the page. Above a certain rate, the law says a loan is usurious. That's the word, usury, and in this state the penalty for it isn't small. If a note is written above the legal ceiling, the whole note can be declared void. Not reduced. Void, and the lender can be forced to give back everything he collected. He looked up at her. Nobody ever checks the rate. That's the thing. People get a note, they see a payment they can just barely make, and they pay it. They never once do the arithmetic on what the rate actually is. They just pay. Cora sat very still. And Walter's rate. 2% a month. Is that over the line? Wren opened his mouth to answer, and then he stopped, because he was honest too, in his way, and he didn't want to tell her a thing he couldn't yet prove. 2% a month worked out to a yearly figure he could feel was high enough to matter, but he wanted to set it against the exact ceiling in the statute and be sure. And more than that, he wanted the proof that would stand up. A typed letter from Voss wasn't proof of the note's true terms. He needed the original note itself, the one Walter had signed, with the rate written on it in Voss's own hand. And he needed Voss's ledger, the big book with the fountain pen entries, to show what had really been charged and collected. Without those, it was a widow's word against a respectable businessman's, and Wren knew whose word Pruitt County would take. "I need 2 things," he said finally. "I need the original note. And I need his ledger, his own records. If the rate on that note is what I think it is, and I can prove it on paper, then Mr. Voss doesn't take your house. Mrs. Denning, Mr. Voss gives you back every dollar Walter ever paid him." He said it carefully, like a man testing ice. "But I have to prove it. And he's not going to hand me the note. You already know that. He's had you asking for a copy for a month." Cora looked down at the little green book on the desk. She thought about Walter licking the pencil. A number ought to have a home. She reached out and put her hand flat on the cover of the book. "He kept his own records, too," she said. "Walter did. It's all in here. Every payment, the date, and the note number off the top of the note." She slid the book across the desk to Wren. "I don't know if it's what you need, but it's 5 years of the truth, written down by a man who couldn't tell a lie if you paid him to." Wren opened the book. He turned the soft gray pages, one after another, $6 and a date and a note number, $6 and a date and a note number, and Cora watched the young lawyer's face as he went, watched something wake up in it that hadn't been there when she walked in. He got to the back of the book. He was quiet. "Mrs. Denning," he said, and his voice had changed, "the sale is in 12 days. I know it. If we do nothing, they auction your house on the courthouse steps a week from Saturday." He closed the book gently, the way you'd close something that belonged to the dead. "But we don't have to do nothing. We can go to the court first. We can file a counterclaim, we can ask the judge to declare this note void as usurious, and we can petition him to stop the sale until it's decided. It means suing Emmett Voss. It means standing up in the Pruitt County Courthouse and calling that man a lawbreaker in front of everyone he's ever loaned $1 to. He looked at her, and he was young enough to be afraid of it, and honest enough to say so. It's not a small thing you'd be doing. And I have to tell you plain, I'm not sure yet the forfeiture reaches all the way to the principal. I have to be sure of my numbers first. But if you want to fight it, we don't beg him, and we don't run. We file. And the widow sues the shark. Cora Denning sat in that one-room office with her dead husband's receipt book between them and the sheriff's sale notice in her handbag and 12 days on the clock. She thought about the pity in the church, and the 11 men at the feed store looking at their boots, and Emmett Voss spreading his hands and calling it a kindness. She thought about Walter on the porch step with his hat in the grass, and the tin box on the shelf above the stove with their 2 names on the deed inside it. She picked up the green book and held it, and she looked at David Wren, and she said, "Then let's find out what number that man wrote down." What neither of them knew yet. What Cora couldn't have guessed, as she buttoned her coat and stepped back out onto the square with the fight decided, was that Emmett Voss had written that number in his own careful hand, in the front of the note and again in the ledger in the back room, and that he had kept every page of it for 5 years, proud of his good books. Certain no one in Halloway would ever think to read them back to him. The rate was on paper. The rate was 3 times what the law allowed, and the widow was 12 days from walking into a courtroom to prove it if she could get her hands on the one piece of paper Emmett Voss would now do anything to make disappear. The lawyer's office had one window, and it faced the alley. So the light that came in was borrowed light, bounced off brick. Cora sat under it 3 mornings running that week. David Wren spread papers across the desk and drank cold coffee and read the note's language out loud until they both had it by heart. On the 4th morning he stopped pretending. "We can pay him," he said. "You can make a plan. He'll take it. He'd rather have your $6 forever than fight a boy lawyer in a rented room." Cora folded her hands. "Is that what you think I should do?" "No," he said it fast, like it had been waiting. "I think we file." So they filed. It was a plain thing, in the end, a stack of typed pages and a filing fee that Cora counted out of her coin purse in nickels and dimes while the clerk waited. A counterclaim to void the note. A petition to stop the sheriff's sale until a judge could look at the number Emmett Voss had written down. Wren carried it across the square to the Pruitt County Courthouse himself, and Cora walked beside him, and neither of them said much. At the clerk's counter, he set it down. "Denning," he said, "against Voss." The clerk was a heavy man with ink on his cuff. He read the caption twice. He looked up at Cora, and then at the young lawyer, and something moved behind his face that was not quite a smile. "Voss," he said. "That's right." Well, he stamped it. The stamp came down hard. "Somebody finally." That was all he said. But he said it, and Cora heard it, and she carried it home like a warm stone in her pocket. Here is the thing about a woman who has decided to fight. She does not look any different. Cora went to Sunday service and let the church women pat her hand and tell her they were praying. She let the pity sit on her like a shawl. In the grocery she said the sale was hard, yes, and she supposed she'd find a small place to rent, and no, she didn't rightly know where. She let them believe it. She packed 2 boxes and set them by the front door where anyone at the window could see them. Because Emmett Voss talked. He was on Main Street inside a week, telling it his way. He told it at the barber's, and he told it at the counter of his own store, standing under the rows of new radios he sold on time to men who couldn't afford them. "The widow's got herself a lawyer," he'd say, and he'd shake his head like it grieved him. "A boy. Rents a room off the square. She'd have done better to come to me. I'd have been reasonable. Now there'll be lawyers in it, and lawyers cost, and where's a woman like that going to find it? She'll be out by October, and poorer for the trouble. I hate to see it. He hated to see it. He said that a lot. What Emmett Voss did not know, because it never crossed his mind that a widow and a boy could reach into his back room and pull a thing out into the daylight, was that a subpoena for his ledgers was being drafted on the desk under the alley window. David Wren wrote it out longhand first, then typed it, then read it a fourth time to be sure the language was clean. A demand, with the court's weight behind it, that Emmett Voss produce the original signed note and the ledger in which he recorded the payments. His own good books. The ones he was so proud of. That was the joke of it, and Cora knew the joke, and she had to hold it inside her while the town called her poor. The men came on a Tuesday. 2 of them, in a car she didn't know, and they parked at her curb and sat a while before they got out. She watched them from the kitchen window. Big men, soft in the middle, the kind that did a little of everything for a man like Voss and were paid in whatever fell off the table. They came up the walk and stood on her porch, and one of them knocked on the frame of the screen door. Gentle. Like he'd been told to be gentle. Cora opened the inside door, but not the screen. "Mrs. Denning," the knocker said. "Mr. Voss sent us to talk." "Neighborly, did he? He's worried about you. All this trouble. He thinks maybe you got some bad advice, and you're too proud to back out of it." The man looked at his shoes. "He said to tell you he'd still be reasonable. If you'd sign, this could all just go away. Save everybody the grief." The second man said nothing. He looked at her boxes through the screen, the 2 of them stacked by the door, and Cora saw him see them, and she let him. "You men had a drive," she said. "It's warm. Let me bring you something." She went to the kitchen. Above the stove sat the tin box that once held tea, and inside it the deed. And she did not so much as glance at it. She poured lemonade into 2 jelly glasses and carried them out on a tray and handed them through the door she now opened, the screen swinging wide, because a woman with nothing to hide swings the door wide. They drank her lemonade on her porch and did not know what to do with it. "You tell Mr. Voss I thank him for his worry," Cora said. "You tell him I'm an old woman and I get tired, and I expect I'll do the sensible thing before long." She smiled at them the way she smiled at the churchwomen. "It's a comfort, men coming by. It gets lonesome out here." They left the glasses on the rail. They drove off slower than they'd come. That night, in the back room of the appliance store, one of them said to Emmett Voss, she wasn't scared. "Emmett, she gave us lemonade. She wasn't scared at all." Voss laughed. He was counting a drawer, and he didn't look up. "She's an old woman rattling around in a house she's about to lose," he said. "She'll be scared enough on the 3rd Saturday of October, when Lloyd Farr reads the sale off her own front steps. Old people go still when they're frightened. That's all that is." But he thought about it after they'd gone. Just for a second. The lemonade. The wide-open door. Then he shut the drawer and put it out of his mind, because Emmett Voss had been right about frightened people for 30 years, and a man does not easily doubt the one thing he has always been right about. The subpoena landed on a Thursday, served by the same deputy who had nailed the sale notice to her door, Lloyd Farr, who could not meet Cora's eye any more when they passed, and who now had to carry the court's paper into Voss's store and hand it across the counter. It changed the weather in that back room fast. By Monday, Emmett Voss had a lawyer of his own, and not a boy in a rented room. Harlan Pike drove down from the county seat in a clean car and wore a suit that fit and spoke to David Wren the way a grown man speaks to a child he means to be patient with. Pike did not shout. Pike smiled. And within the week, Pike made an offer. They laid it out at Wren's desk, the 4 of them crowded under the alley window. Pike in the good chair. Voss standing by the door with his hat in his hand, playing at humble, Cora in the corner with the receipt book in her lap. "Mr. Voss wants peace," Pike said. He's a friend to working families. This has all gotten bigger than it needed to. So here's what he'll do, and it's generous, and I'd advise your client to hear it plain." He spread his hands, and Cora watched him spread them exactly the way Voss spread his. "He'll forgive the balance. The whole 1,240. Gone, she keeps her house, no sale, we walk away friends." He paused. "In exchange, she drops this usury business and signs a release. And Mr. Voss holds a small option, a quitclaim, first refusal, should she ever choose to sell. That's all, a signature, and it's over today." David Wren leaned forward. Cora could see it in him. He wanted it. He was 27 and he had a widow's house on the line, and here was a man in a good suit handing him the house back across the desk. His mouth was already opening to say yes. "Let me see the paper," Cora said. Pike slid it to her. She read it slow. She had spent 30 years reading the fine print on mending tickets and grocery credit and every receipt Walter ever brought home, and she read this the same way, with her finger under the line. The release gave up the usury claim. She'd known it would. But the quitclaim option was not small. It let Emmett Voss buy the house, any time in the next 10 years, at a price named in a schedule stapled to the back, and the price named was $200. $200. The house, for the debt, dressed up as a favor and slipped in behind a signature. Cora set the paper down. "No," she said. Wren turned to her. "Mrs. Denning, no." She looked at Pike, and then she looked at Voss by the door, and she spoke to Voss. "You'd forgive $1,200 to buy silence. A man doesn't pay $1,200 to bury a thing that can't hurt him." She stood and gathered her book. "You're afraid of the number, Mr. Voss. I didn't know that for certain until just now. Thank you." Pike stopped smiling. That was how she knew she was right. After they'd gone, David Wren sat down hard in his chair and rubbed his face. "We just turned down a house," he said. "We turned down a leash," said Cora. "Now get the ledger." The ledger came because it had to. Pike fought it and lost, and on a gray afternoon a box of Emmett Voss's records was carried into the clerk's office, and David Wren was allowed to sit at a table and copy from it, page by careful page, under a bored deputy's eye. He brought the numbers back to the office that evening and put them on the board. Cora watched him do the arithmetic she had not been able to do herself, because she had the payments and the balance, but not the rule that turned them into a crime. "Here's the note," Wren said. He wrote it up top. $200, winter of 1966. And here's the rate, in his hand, front of the note, and again in the ledger, 2%. He tapped it. 2% a month. "A month," Cora said. "A month." He wrote it out. People hear 2% and they think it's small. 2% a year would be small. But he wrote it by the month. 12 months in a year. He multiplied it on the board where she could see. 2% 12 times. 24% a year. He stepped back so she could look at the number. 24, Cora said. "And here's the law." He wrote the second number under it, smaller, and circled it. "The most a man could charge in this state, the ceiling, 8% a year. That's the wall. Nobody's allowed over it." He drew a line between the two figures. He charged 3 times the wall. And when a note runs over that ceiling, under the forfeiture statute, it isn't just trimmed back to legal. It's void. The whole thing. He doesn't get his interest, and he doesn't get his principal, and every dollar the borrower already paid, the law says he gives it back. The room was quiet. The borrowed light had gone out of the window, and Wren had a lamp on now, and in the lamplight the 2 numbers sat on the board, 24 and 8, and the space between them was the whole story. $410, Cora said finally. Walter paid him $410 on $200 borrowed. on a note that was never good in the first place. Wren's voice had changed. The boy in it was gone. "Mrs. Denning, this isn't a defense anymore. This is a claim. He owes you money." Cora looked at the board a long time. She thought about Walter at the kitchen table, laid up, his hip cracked, signing his name to a paper a man had told him was a kindness. She thought about the little green book and the $6 every payday, faithful as church, 5 years of them, Walter writing each one down in his careful hand, because Walter believed that if you kept honest records, the world would eventually be honest back. He'd been right. It had just taken him dying, and her fighting, to make it so. "He wrote it himself," she said. "The rate, in 2 places, his own pen. Then he can't say a boy in a rented room made it up." Cora stood and buttoned her coat. "Let's take it to the judge." The week before the hearing, the original note went missing. David Wren found out on a Wednesday. He'd gone to the clerk's office to confirm the exhibits, to lay eyes one more time on the signed note that Voss had been forced to produce, and it was not in the file. The clerk searched. The deputy searched. It was logged as received. It was gone. Wren came to Sedgwick Street in the last light with his tie loose and his face white. "Without the note, we can't authenticate the handwriting," he said. He was pacing her kitchen. "The ledger's a copy. Pike will say we can't tie the rate to Walter's actual signature without the original. He'll move to dismiss. He probably already has. Mrs. Denning, I think somebody walked it out of that office, and I think we both know who, and I can't prove that either." He stopped. "I'm sorry. I might have lost your house because I trusted a county filing cabinet." Cora poured him a cup of coffee and set it in front of him and made him sit down. "Drink that," she said. She went into the front room. She was gone a while. When she came back, she had the little green receipt book in her hand, and she set it on the table between them, and she opened it to the very back. There was a flap there, a pocket in the back cover, the kind a man makes with a strip of gum tape when he wants a safe place for a thing. Cora slid 2 fingers in and drew out a folded square of paper gone soft at the creases. "Walter didn't trust filing cabinets either," she said. Wren unfolded it with shaking hands. It was a carbon, a flimsy blue carbon copy of the note. The words pressed through from the original the day it was signed, the terms, the collateral, the principal, and the rate in the front, 2% by the month. And at the bottom, ghosted but plain, Walter Denning's signature, and Emmett Voss's beside it. Walter had kept his own copy. Of course he had. He wrote down the payments nobody made him record. He was never going to sign a paper and let the other man be the only one who held it. David Wren looked at the carbon, and then he looked at Cora, and he started to laugh. Low, the laugh of a man who has been drowning and felt his foot touch the bottom. "He kept a carbon," he said. "For 5 years. In a tackle tray. He wrote down everything," Cora said. "I told you that the first day. You didn't quite believe me. I believe you now." Wren pressed the carbon flat with both hands like it might blow away. "Mrs. Denning, the note being missing doesn't hurt us anymore. It helps us. A signed note that vanishes from a court file the week before the hearing, with a carbon in our hand to show what was in it, that's not a hole in our case. That's the frame of it. That's a man so afraid of a piece of paper he stole it from a courthouse." He was already reaching for his coat. "Let them move to dismiss. Let them." They did move to dismiss. And the judge, an old man named Merle Cavanaugh, who had watched the county's business for 30 years, read the motion and read Wren's answer with the carbon attached, and he did not dismiss anything. He set it for hearing. And then a curious thing began. In the days before, the thing that turns one widow's trouble into a town's. It started as whispering, and it grew. Ruth Ann Sykes came to the back door on a Friday. She was a lean woman who farmed a little ground east of town with a nephew, and she stood on Cora's step, twisting her apron, and finally said what she'd come to say. "I heard you're taking Emmett Voss to court over his numbers," she said. "Is it true he wrote down a rate that's against the law?" "It's true." Ruth Ann Sykes looked out at the fields a moment. "He took a strip of my bottom land 4 years back," she said, "for a loan on seed. I always thought I just couldn't do the arithmetic. I thought it was me." Her voice thinned. "It wasn't me, was it?" "No," Cora said gently. "I don't believe it was." Otis Vandergrift came too, an old man who'd paid Voss for a tractor 3 times over and lost it anyway. And there were others, names passed along in low voices, families who had each believed, alone in their own kitchens, that the shame was theirs, that they were the ones who'd failed at sums. What Cora and her carbon and her boy lawyer had done, without meaning to, was hang a lamp in a dark place and show a whole town that it had all been the same dark, and the same man holding the door of it shut. David Wren sat in his office the night before the hearing with a list of names growing under his pen, and understood, at last, the size of the thing he'd stumbled into. "This isn't one note," he said. "Mrs. Denning, this was never one note. It's how he lived." The 3rd Saturday of October did not bring a sheriff's sale. It brought a hearing, and the courthouse could not hold the people who came to it. The foundry men came in their Sunday coats, the same men who'd stood at the feed store studying their boots the day Voss called it a kindness. The church women came. Ruth Ann Sykes came, and Otis Vandergrift came and sat where Voss would have to see them. 40 neighbors stood on the courthouse steps because there was no room inside, and the doors were left open so the sound could reach them. Cora wore her good dark dress and sat at the front table beside David Wren, who had pressed his one suit and cut himself shaving. On the table between them lay the little green receipt book, 5 years of Walter's honest hand, entered now as an exhibit, and beside it the ledger and the soft blue carbon. Emmett Voss sat across the aisle with Harlan Pike. He wore gray, pressed sharp. He had come in, nodding at people the way he always did. The friend to working families. But the nods were not coming back to him the way they used to, and Cora watched him feel that. Watched him notice the room had turned its shoulder, and watched him decide it didn't matter because he had a good lawyer and 30 years of being right. Judge Kavanaugh took the bench, and the room stood and settled. David Wren rose. His voice shook on the first sentence, and then it stopped shaking. He walked it through plain, the way he'd taught it to Cora under the alley window, because half the gallery had lived some version of it, and every one of them could follow arithmetic if you showed the work. He laid the note's terms out. He laid the carbon beside the ledger and showed they matched. The rate in the front, 2% by the month, Voss's own hand in both. Then he put the number on the record. 2% a month, he said, is 24% a year. He let it sit. The legal ceiling in this state is 8. Your Honor, this note was written at 3 times what the law allows, and under the usury forfeiture statute a note above the ceiling is not reduced. It is void. Which means Mr. Voss is not owed a balance. Mr. Voss owes a refund, every dollar Walter Denning paid on a note that was never lawful. $410, Your Honor, paid $6 at a time, every one of them written down. He picked up the green book and held it a moment before he set it back, by a man who kept better records than the lender did. Harlan Pike stood and argued. He argued the carbon wasn't the original. He argued the rate could be read another way. He argued that his client was a pillar, a friend to families, that the boy across the aisle was inexperienced and the widow confused. He argued well. But he was arguing against a number on a board and a dead man's careful hand, and you cannot cross-examine arithmetic. When it came Cora's turn to speak, she stood. And the room went so quiet she could hear the neighbors breathing on the steps. She did not gloat. She had promised herself she would not. She looked across the aisle at Emmett Voss, who had put a notice on her screen door over a debt Walter had already overpaid, who had called it a kindness loud enough for 11 men to hear. "Mr. Voss," she said, and her voice was dry and even and carried all the way to the steps. "You told my Walter you did him a kindness. You told the whole town a deal's a deal, and he signed it with his own hand." She paused. "You did write it with your own hand. The rate and all. So I don't have much to say today. All I did was hand the judge your own pen." She sat down. Somebody at the back of the gallery made a sound that was half a cough and half a sob, and Ruthin Sykes was crying without wiping her face, and Emmett Voss sat very still and looked at the table in front of him and did not spread his hands. Judge Kavanaugh took a short recess and came back and did not take long. He ruled from the bench, plain, so the steps could hear it. The note was void as usurious. The sheriff's sale was quashed. The Denning house on Sedgwick Street stood free and clear as it had before Emmett Voss ever put his notice on the door. And under the forfeiture provision, Emmett Voss was ordered to refund to Cora Denning the sum of $410, the whole of what Walter had paid on a debt the law would not honor. The debt that had come to take a house had become money owed back to the widow. The gallery did not cheer. It was not that kind of room. But a long breath went through it, 40 people letting go of something at once, and the foundry men nodded to each other, and it was better than a cheer. Then Judge Kavanaugh was not quite finished. He looked over his glasses at the ledger still lying on the exhibit table, the box of Emmett Voss's good books, every note he'd ever written in the county, in his own proud hand. "That ledger will remain with the court," the judge said. "It appears to contain more than one account." He looked, without hurrying, at the gallery. "If there are others in this county who believe they were charged above the ceiling, they may wish to speak to the prosecutor, who I expect will want to examine these books himself." In the gallery, Ruthin Sykes stood up. She stood, without being asked, alone, a lean farm woman in her good dress, and then Otis Vandergriff got to his feet beside her, with his hat in his 2 hands. And then down the rows others stood, 1 and 2 at a time, until Emmett Voss, turning in his chair, saw a dozen of his own borrowers on their feet and looking at him, and every one of them a page in the book on the table. Harlan Pike leaned to the judge and quietly, tiredly, asked leave to withdraw as counsel. And Cora, watching across the aisle, saw the mask come off Emmett Voss's face at last. Not all at once. It slid. The friend to working families, the man who hated to see it, the reasonable man, all of it slid off. And underneath was just a frightened man in a pressed gray suit, who had counted on being the only one in every kitchen who could do the sums, and had just learned the whole county had learned to add. It came apart faster than anyone expected, the way a thing does when it was only ever held up by everyone agreeing not to look. The prosecutor took the ledgers. Within weeks the county was reviewing every note on Emmett Voss's books, and the bank that carried the appliance store's credit line read the newspaper and pulled it. 3 more families filed their own claims before the first snow. The store on Main Street sat with its lights on, and its radios in the window, and fewer people willing to walk in the door. Because it is one thing to buy a radio on time from a friend to working families, and another to buy it from the man the whole town watched come apart in Judge Kavanaugh's court. And on a cold afternoon in November, Emmett Voss came to Sedgwick Street. He came alone, on foot, no car full of soft men this time, and he stood at the bottom of Cora's walk a while before he came up it, the way the men had, and Cora watched him from the kitchen window the way she'd watched them. He had lost weight. His suit did not fit as sharp. He knocked on the frame of the screen door. Gentle, Cora opened the inside door, but not the screen. "Mrs. Denning," he said. He turned his hat in his hands. "Cora. Mr. Voss." He looked at her through the screen. And whatever he'd rehearsed on the walk over seemed to leave him, and what came out was smaller and truer than anything he'd ever said to her. "It's gone bad for me," he said. "The county's in my books. The bank's called the store. Folks won't come in." He swallowed. "You've got a standing in this town now. People listen to you. If you'd put in a word, tell them I'm not, that I was always meant to be reasonable. A word from you would go a long way. That's all I came to ask. A word." Cora stood behind her screen door and looked at the man who had nailed a notice to it. She thought about Walter on the porch step. She thought about the 11 men at the feed store. She thought about Ruth Ann Sykes twisting her apron and saying, "I thought it was me." And she did not raise her voice, because she never had, and she was not going to start for Emmett Voss. "You know what you told my husband," she said, "when he was laid up and scared and you had him sign the house away. You told him a deal's a deal." She put her hand on the door. "You signed your books with your own hand, Mr. Voss. Every page. I didn't write a word of them. And a deal's a deal." She closed the screen door, and then the inside door behind it, gently, and left him standing on the porch in the cold with his hat in his hands. She heard him go down the walk after a while. She did not watch. They each got what was theirs, in the end, one at a time, the way it comes. Deputy Lloyd Farr, who had nailed the sale notice to her door because it was his job and had not been able to look at her since, stopped Cora at the post office window one morning that winter. He took off his hat. "I served that paper, Mrs. Denning," he said. "I want to say I'm sorry for it. I knew something was crooked, and I served it anyway. I won't do that again." And he meant it. She could see he meant it. And she told him a man who carries the paper isn't the man who wrote it, and let him keep his sorry to spend on being braver next time. Harlan Pike left for a firm 2 counties over that spring, where his name meant nothing and he could start his patient smiling on people who hadn't watched him lose. And Emmett Voss sold the appliance store at a loss the following spring, the radios and the ledgers and the back room where he'd retailed his fear, and left Halloway for wherever men like that go. And the town let him leave, and did not send anything after him but the memory of a dozen borrowers standing up in a courtroom. The refund came to Cora in a county check, $410, and she did 2 things with it. She put a new furnace in the cellar, because Walter had always said the old one wouldn't see another bad winter, and he'd been right about that too. And she paid, at last, to have Walter's headstone engraved. It had stood a year with only his name on it, because there had never been money for the rest, and she had them cut the dates beneath, and under the dates, 3 words she chose herself: "He kept accounts." 1 year on, it was October again in Halloway. The good kind, the light gone long and gold across the flat land north of town. Cora Denning sat on the front porch of the house on Sedgwick Street with a bowl of beans in her lap and shelled them slow in the last warm afternoon of the year. The house was hers. It had been hers all along. But now it was hers the way a thing is when nobody living can come and put a paper on the door. Inside, on the shelf above the stove, the tin box that once held tea sat where it belonged. And the deed inside it, free and clear, 2 names on it still. And on the shelf by the window, where the afternoon light reached it late in the day and made the cover glow, stood a little green pocket receipt book, worn soft, standing upright the way Walter would have wanted a thing that mattered to stand, where you could see it. She thought about Emmett Voss sometimes, though not often, and never for long. She'd heard he'd landed somewhere downstate, smaller. She did not wish him harm. She didn't have to. The harm had been in his own handwriting the whole time. He had been so proud of his good books. In the end, they read them back to him. The furnace ticked on in the cellar against the coming cold. The light moved off the receipt book and up the wall and out. Cora shelled the last of the beans and sat a while longer in the quiet, in the house that was paid for, and it was enough. The law had a ceiling the whole time. Someone only ever had to read it. Comment the town you're watching from. I'd like to know how far Cora's story has traveled.